Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with another PB&J card class and holiday inspiration. And for today's card, I will be doing some scenic stamping using our new stamp called Snow Trails. This is a cling stamp. And here's a look at the one layer card that we will be creating. And I just love this type of stamp because it is perfect for this sort of stamp layering technique. I just want to mention that all of the supplies I'm using today, including the ink colors, the stamps, everything will be listed at the end of the video. So to begin, I am working on a standard size card panel. So this is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and I'm stamping this in the Misty Stamp Positioning tool. So this tool allows me to repeatedly stamp the image in the exact same place, which is how I'm able to build up the layers of color. Now I am using, to begin with, archival ink, and these are some really great colors by Wendy Vecchi that she has come up with for the archival inks. And I'm using the mini stamp pads to begin with, and these are great for getting in for these tiny little details. So I'm starting with the trees, and I am using some leaf green and fern green on the trees, and I'm just sort of looking and pouncing that ink pad in to the areas for those trees in the background. And I'm not too worried if I get it onto the other trees that are more in the foreground because they will be a darker color. But if I see that I've done so, I just sort of wipe it off with my finger. You could also use a paper towel or a baby wipe. And I'm just going to go back and keep stamping these and layering the ink until I'm happy with the color that I achieve. I work in small sections so that the ink doesn't dry before I have a chance to stamp it. And you could do this in so many different colors. So I went for a really bright and bold, sort of vibrant look on this card, but you could also do this in very muted, neutral tones. So you could do some darker trees in the background and lighter in the front, but all in shades of green. The possibilities are really endless. I think these trees here way in the background would also be very nice in sort of shades of blue if you're doing this more as like a nighttime snowy scene. So next I'm going to work on these trees in the foreground, and I am first going to stamp them with Orange Blossom archival ink. And don't be afraid when I stamp this, they're going to totally look orange, but I'm going to layer some brown on top of it. And I find that that really gives a lot of depth and sort of some brightness and life, even though it will end up being a neutral tone. Now I'm just keeping my eyes out here onto the fence area on the stamp, and if I just see a lot that goes on there, I was wiping it off with my finger. But now I remembered I decided not to worry about that because it was going to end up being a much darker color. So that's getting the orange, but that's okay because I'll be layering over the top. So at this point it looks a little scary with the orange, but hold on, it all comes together in the end. There's a lot of solid area up near the top, so I will stamp that more than once. And I am stamping onto the Wendy Vecchi Perfect cardstock panels. It's a really great smooth surface for stamping. And I really like the way that it sort of absorbs the inking with the stamping and also the background inking that I'll be showing you in just a bit. So I'm just going in here and getting this other side, stamping it a few times just to darken up the color. And just being careful not to try not to get too much of that orange onto those trees and the green trees in the background. If you get a little bit, the image is natural and organic looking enough that it isn't a huge deal if you get a little bit onto one of the green trees, but you wouldn't want to, have one of those trees totally be orange or brown. So I went ahead and I have done all of that in the Orange Blossom, and now I'm going to come in with the color of Potting Soil. Again, this is another archival ink. I've chosen this style of ink mainly because I really like the size of these mini ink pads, and I love these colors by Wendy Vecchi. They just all look so beautiful. But you could do this with whatever ink pads you have on hand. We'll be sort of sealing it in with embossing powder, so it's mainly about choosing the colors that you like the most. We're not going to be doing any sort of painting or wet media on top of this, so you don't need to worry about that when selecting your ink colors. And you can see now when I start to layer on this potting soil color, I just love the way that that looks with sort of those orange undertones. It just can give, by layering the colors like this, it can give your browns and whatever colors you're using just a really different look, and you can get more from the colors that you have on hand. So I'm just kind of studying here to see where I might need to add some more color, and that is looking pretty good. And next I've taken a distress marker. This is the color of Black Soot, and I'm just putting a really light layer here onto the fence. I wanted that to stand out more and just have a little more variety of color onto the scene. So I'm just coloring that right onto there and stamping it down. I love the way that this stamp has that great perspective of that trail or that road headed off into the distance. And once again, I'm just adding, I'm so sorry for my head there in the way and my horrible hair. It's not the best angle, but what I'm doing here is just coloring directly onto the paper with that marker. I just wanted it to be really dark, and I couldn't quite get it as dark as I wanted it by stamping it. So I'm just looking right where the fence is. It's really easy just to color right on top of there. Now I'll do this other side so that I end up with the same look on both sides, just coloring onto the stamp and pressing it down. You could actually do this whole image with markers. So where I use those mini archival ink pads, you could also do that with just the markers if you wanted. Although for large areas, especially the brown on those trees in the upper left hand corner, I do find you can get more even coverage using an ink pad. And again, behind my crazy hair in my head, I am just coloring directly onto the paper and onto that fence with the marker in order to get that nice and dark. And here I've just pulled out the Acorn archival ink pad, and this is an even larger ink pad, and I'm just applying it sort of to the upper corners, and then I dabbed off along the edges using a dry paper towel just to soften that edge. And again, I chose to use this larger ink pad because I'm covering a larger expanse of the stamp, and you can just get more even coverage that way. And I like how this sort of ties into that darker color of the fence, sort of pulls it up towards the top of the scene. And I decided to darken up the green a little bit here at the base of those trees. So I have grabbed the fern green mini archival ink pad and added that onto the trees. Now I'm thoroughly cleaning off my stamp. I just use a baby wipe to do that. I have not moved the stamp or my paper in the stamp positioning tool. That is important. And what I'm going to do now is seal in all of that stamping that we've done by doing some embossing. So I'm going to take a paper towel, pat off my stamp because I want to be sure that it's totally dry. My baby wipe was pretty juicy, so I wanted to be sure that that's totally dry. And I'm going to run an anti-static bag across my paper, being careful not to move it around. And now I'm going to use some Versamark ink and just ink up this stamp and then stamp it over on to my paper. This is Versamark ink is just sort of like a sticky ink, and the embossing powder will stick to that. And because there's so much detail to this stamp, and there's also large expanses of sort of solid area up in those trees, I'm going to do this a few times. You probably would be fine just to do it once, but I've gotten in the habit of doing it, of stamping just a couple of times to be sure that I've fully covered the stamp, and I'm going to sprinkle this with clear embossing powder, and that is going to seal in all of those colors. So now when we apply inks to our background, they are not going to stick to any areas that are embossed, so they will be resisted by the embossing. So the background can be a different color than the stamping. And it's just so easy to make a scene like this. So I'm just using some sticky notes to tape off the edge of that snowy area. And I'm going to use the Wendy Vecchi Make Art Blendable Dye inks. Again, I have chosen these because I love her colors. I also do not want to use any permanent inks for this step. So these inks are great, Distress inks are great, but you would not want to use the archival inks on this because they would not be resisted by the embossing that we did on our stamped image. So dye inks are great like these. I started with Sunflower, and then I'm adding that Orange Blossom in. And then the next color I'm going to use is Violet, and this is such a bright color, but just a touch of this brightness I think just totally makes this sky, and we'll use it a little bit down below on the shadows for the snow. A really great winter color if you want some vibrancy to your scenes. Now to tone it down, especially up in the corners, I'm going to layer on top of that some cornflower blue. And you can see that those stamped areas are just resisting that ink, and it's only going onto the sky. Now I'm using the Ranger Mini Detail applicator tool, and this is great. It just has a little spongy part at the top, so I can get in here and just apply that ink right in these small areas sort of along the fence line, and I will get a little bit up at the top by the trees. I think I add some up there. So I did the violet, and then also on top of that the cornflower blue to sort of mimic the colors that are up in the sky. And I love how much adding these shadows adds to the entire scene. And by using these detail blending tools, it's almost like being able to have the precision of a marker, but the look of the sponging and the inking that you get with the ink blending tools and the foam pads. So once I had all of that done, I was ready to stamp my sentiment, and I've chosen a sentiment from our transparent set Peaceful Season. There's a lot of beautiful sentiments in this, and I'm using the one Peace, Joy, and Love. It fits perfectly down here sort of at the bottom of that trail. And I'm inking this with Acorn Archival ink. I've chosen that ink just because I really love the color, and it ties into the stamping that we did on the upper portion of those trees at the beginning of the video. And I'm stamping it a few times just to get a really nice impression and a nice dark impression. And once I was done, sometimes I just can't stop with the cards. So I did add a little bit of that acorn ink up at the top, using the ink blending tool and the foam pad, starting off of the edge and working my way on. And now I'm ready to add just some snow to the scene. So I'm just adding this with a white gel pen. You could also use some watered down white acrylic paint and flick it on, but I just wanted to have a little bit more control to keep most of it up near the top outside corners of the card. And I also am using that same white gel pen to add a touch of snow along the fence. And I love what just that little touch adds to the entire scene too. And this panel is ready to be mounted to a card. It's one layer, so it's very easy to mail if you're making a lot or mailing out a lot of Christmas cards. So here's another look at that finished card. I thank you so much for watching. And I hope if you enjoyed today's video, you'll give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, and on our website and blog. And I will link to all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And stay tuned here. Right at the end of the video, up on screen is a list of all the supplies used. Happy stamping!